Better. Okay. Okay, so my name is Sidney Levy. I'm from Jewish Voice for Peace. I'm originally from Venezuela and I speak fast. So if you cannot hear, cannot understand, need me to slow down, or have any questions, say so. Yes? Promise? Promise. Good. Okay. Good. So my hope, as I said, is that we are going to do a little bit about what is our position at Jewish Voice for Peace regarding BDS, what is BDS, and then talk a little bit about what we learned this year from Presbyterian and Methodist boycott and divestment measures. There's also a lot of questions about how to answer some of the counter arguments regarding BDS. I'm going to mention some of those things, but I'm going to leave a chunk of it if you have questions about it for the Q&A at the end, because there are very specific arguments that are coming against these efforts, and there are also some suggestions about, what are the answers that you use, what are the answers that can be used, etc. So let me start by saying that at Jewish Voice for Peace, we are a national organization with 35 chapters across the country, and with a list of over 125,000 supporters, again, not only across the country, but internationally as well. And we base ourselves on from two sources. We source ourselves from Jewish tradition and also from human rights, which is international human rights, and that applies to, obviously, to everyone. From Jewish tradition, I just want to ground us for a second on two quotes that at least help me or guide my work. One of them is very simple, and it comes from Hillel the Sage, and it says, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." That is the whole Torah. The rest is explanation. Go and learn. So it's very simple. It's don't do to other people what you don't want done to yourself. It's a very simple yardstick. And the second one comes from the Talmud, from Pirkei Avot. That's the wisdom of our fathers, and I would say of our mothers as well. And it says, it's very simple. It says, on three things does the world stand: on justice, on truth, and on peace. These three things are actually one. When justice is done, truth is served, and peace is achieved. So you can even simplify it. This is a Talmud, like sometimes to speak long, but you can simplify it and you can say no justice, no peace. So it's the same idea. So those are the sources inside of Jewish tradition in which I ground my work and in which we ground our work. Now, how do we implement them in real terms? We implement them with a very simple yardstick, and that's human rights. So human rights, it's basically treating all human beings as having the same inalienable rights. And that's what BDS does, by the way. BDS, you can think of it as the acronym that deals with the B, the D, and the S, obviously, that deal with three separate tactics. And it's important to understand that the BDS movement is not an ideology per se, but it's a tactic. It's something that we can use to achieve a goal. It's basically a non-violent tactic. And so the B stands for boycotts, and that's what consumers do. You decide to buy or not buy certain products. The D stands for divestments, and that's what investors do. You decide to invest or not invest your money in a particular way. And the S stands for sanctions, and that's what governments do. You decide to sanction another government in one way or another. So again, you have the consumers, the investors, and the governments deciding or not to take action. So those are tactics, but the tactics follow the same yardstick that I was mentioning before, which is human rights. We heard the presentation before from Biko Pellet, and he was talking about partition, one state, two states. All of these are very important and relevant discussions. They're not necessarily discussions that pertain necessarily to the BDS call as it was call from Palestine. I just want to be very clear, like there is a call that came in 2005 from Palestinian civil society. That call doesn't talk about one state or two states, doesn't talk about partition, doesn't talk about any of those things. It just mentions human rights. And it mentioned, and which is the same position, by the way, that Jewish Voice for Peace has. We follow human rights. And the BDS calls mentions three things. They mention freedom, equality, and justice. And again, based on a human rights agenda, freedom is freedom from occupation. Equality is equality for Israeli Jews and Palestinians, and justice is justice for the Palestinian refugees so that they are allowed to return. Now, the fact that the BDS call from 2005 mentions freedom from occupation, which you can understand in terms of 1967, the lands that were conquered in 1967, equality for Palestinians and Israeli Jews, etc., in 1948, so in what is now technically the state of Israel inside of the Green Line, and justice for refugees, which are the Palestinians that are in the diaspora. The fact that the call defines those three parts does not necessarily mean that the call talks about two states, but it does not mean that the call talks about one state either. The Palestinian call basically talks about Palestinians in the three states of being where Palestinians are. Palestinians are either living under occupation, or living under Israel, under the Israel state, or living in exile. Those are the three places, obviously, where you will find Palestinians, and the three of them need to find a solution. The solution can be one state, two states, three states. As long as you find freedom, equality, and justice, the solution will work. And this is very important to remember, that once you find those three elements, freedom, equality, and justice, then there is no longer a place for BDS. BDS is a tactic that has an end. Once we find freedom, equality, and justice, there is no longer any reason to boycott. There is no longer any reason to divest. There is no longer any reason to impose sanctions. This is very important because, particularly for us as Jews, we remember a different kind of boycott, and we sometimes confuse things. And it's very important to disentangle the confusion. We remember the boycott of the Nazi boycott of Jewish goods in Nazi Germany. That actually started fairly early. The Nazis came to power in 1933. That same year, in April of that year, the boycott of Jewish goods started. And so we sometimes confuse things when we hear the name boycott, and people sometimes are afraid of that. And we need to be very clear about the differences, which are profound differences between the Nazi boycott of Jewish goods and what we are talking in here. Anyone has some suggestions about what are some of the differences? Why are these two things not the same? The methodologies are totally diametrically opposed. The Nazi boycott of Jewish goods was violent, whereas we are talking about a non-violent approach. That's one difference. Any other differences? The result is different, and also is the target. So the Nazi boycott of Jewish goods basically had no end in sight. The end was the genocide of the Jews. There was no way that the Jews could do good or could solve this issue, according to the Nazis. Whereas the BDS call actually has an end in sight. It's not targeting Jews, it targets behavior. It targets the human rights violations. And once those human rights violations are cleared, once we get to the point of freedom, equality, and justice, there is no need for BDS anymore, which again doesn't target Jews, but targets actually bad behavior. Yes?
Well, another difference is that one is government sanction and the other is citizen involvement.
Indeed. The Nazi boycott of Jewish goods, it was a boycott that was imposed from the government to its own citizens to actually take away rights, take away property, take away dignity, and eventually take away life. whereas the BDS call is a call that's coming from the people against a government to actually restore property, restore dignity, and preserve life. They are, in almost all of the items that we mentioned, diametrically opposed. Yet they get confused, and it's very important when you speak about BDS, and certainly when you speak with Jews, to address this issue if it comes out, to disentangle the issue, because it really gets confused in a way that is not healthy. There is something else which is interesting, which is the word boycott in Hebrew, and this applies more for Israelis than for American Jews. Most American Jews don't speak Hebrew, but in Israel the word boycott is herem. Herem means excommunication. Unfortunately, the Hebrew language, which is a beautiful language, I speak Hebrew and has many words for many things, doesn't have the imagination to imagine a boycott, which is not an excommunication, which is actually obviously carries a much heavier religious burden, which is not intended in boycott. So I just want to put these things out there just so that you understand at least some of the biases that come sometimes from the organized Jewish community when they hear things about BDS. But there is a larger bias that comes out of it, which comes from the third part of the call for BDS, the call from civil society. And I mentioned freedom, equality, and justice. The justice piece is the issue of the refugees and the right of return. And that's the unspoken heavier burden or opposition that comes from the Jewish community, because you will find people inside of the mainstream Jewish community that may support an end to the occupation, that may understand, even though not fully, what equality really means, which is not privileging people because they're Jewish or because of any religious or ethnic background, but treating everyone equal, really equal under the law. But then we get to the right of return. And the right of return for Palestinian refugees really gets to the core of what does it mean or it doesn't mean to have a Jewish state. And people sometimes ask me that question: do you support the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state? And I was just talking with some people beforehand at the break about this issue. Maybe what you're doing with boycott is very narrowly targeted to Caterpillar or to Motorola Solutions or to Ahava, and you're not necessarily dealing with the refugee issue. But in truth, in the mainstream, in the organized Jewish community, that's what they're thinking. They're thinking that this is a slippery slope that starts with demolishing Palestinian homes that you may be opposing here with Caterpillar, but ends with the right of return. And they ask, what do you think about the Jewish state? What do you think about it? And I always answer back, and I say that I don't have many thoughts about it unless someone first starts and defines, what do you mean by a Jewish state? If you work with me and find a definition of a Jewish state that includes equality for everyone, then I can work with that. But you have the burden to prove that first. I know that I live in the United States, and I live in a society or in a country that makes separation of church and state one of its founding principles. And that actually has served American Jews very well. We thrive under that system, under a system that includes separation of church and state. We thrive under that system because Jews in this country, we are 2% of the population. We certainly wouldn't want to live in a Christian nation enshrined by law. The same, remember what I said at the beginning? What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. Living in this society, if there was no separation of church and state, as an American Jew, I wouldn't be a happy camper. I would protest. I would say, I want separation of church and state. So what I want in here is what I wish for Israeli Jews, what I wish for Palestinians, what I wish for others, is equality, right? So if you find a definition that works of a Jewish state that encompasses equality, then I'm for it. But then we need to talk first of those terms. That's what is important for us in Jewish Voice for Peace. First and foremost is to find what are the human rights requirements of freedom, equality, and justice that will make things work. Now, yes. Well, I actually see that there are places where there is room for Jewish expression. I'm happy that there is a state where Hebrew is one of the national languages. I would be happy with a state where, Hebrew and Arabic are national languages. And I mean, there are ways in which we can respect culture and tradition, but which are perfectly fine with me. I draw the line when we start talking about demographics. I draw the line when we start talking about we have to make sure that one particular religious or ethnic group has to be guaranteed the majority of the demographic pie. Because when we get there, we start getting into places that are, that start smelling like racism and start looking like racism, and they're not fine. Okay, so all of that is part of the discussion. It's not the main point of every BDS campaign, but you should know that is what is behind, I think, when in the organized Jewish community, in the mainstream Jewish community, when they oppose to this conference, the Sabeel conference, when they oppose BDS, that's part of what they are thinking, and those are some of the conversations that need to be had. I'm going to just spend one more word on this item, and then we need to move on, which is the issue of the Palestinian the right of the Palestinian refugees. Of course, it's a very important issue. I already addressed it. It's now in Israel being addressed differently. Israel is putting forth the claim that there is a counterbalancing, which is that there are Jews that left from Arab countries all throughout the Middle East, and that's a counterbalancing, that there are refugees that are coming from the Arab world. As a matter of fact, Israel is having the chutzpah to say that counterbalance is bigger or is larger than the Palestinian refugee claim, both in terms of number of people migrating, but also in terms of property lost, that more property was lost by Jews in other countries of the Middle East than by Palestinians during the Nakba, even though Israel does not recognize the Nakba, but they're making that claim. I will tell you that I was born in Venezuela. My parents were Jews that left Egypt in 1956. So I know from personal experience at least one story of Jews leaving from Arab countries. Now, every story is different, and every Jewish community in the Arab world had a different experience. So you cannot generalize from the experience of my family, but you can also not generalize from the experience of Egyptian Jews, which was different than the experience of Iraqi Jews, Moroccan, Tunisian, Algerian Jews, etc. So each one has a different story. But the commonality of the stories is this. First of all, if we have a claim to make, our claim goes directly to those governments. So if my parents have a claim to make regarding property lost, and we did lose property in Egypt, in Alexandria, that's where my parents are from, that claim, the knocking on the door is not with the Palestinian people. In the case of my parents, the knocking on the door is with the Egyptian government. In the case of the Iraqi Jews, it's with the Iraqi government, with the Moroccan Jews, with the Moroccan government, etc. The Palestinians are not at fault by what other governments do. Claiming that the Palestinians are responsible would be similar to having a claim to say that because something bad happened to you in Argentina, you can go to Mexico and claim compensation in Mexico. Just because people are Latin American doesn't mean that they're all the same. Just because people are Arabs doesn't mean that they're all the same. It's naive and ignorant to claim that. That's number one. Number two, the main claim beyond compensation that refugees have is the claim to return. Now, I will tell you from my parents' perspective, they don't want to return to Egypt. Moroccan Jews that left, generally, you can ask them, or Iraqi Jews, don't want to return. They either settled in Israel or they settled in other countries. There's thriving Sephardic and Mizrahi communities here in Latin America and other places, but they don't want to return. That's not the case with the Palestinians. They want to return. The right of a refugee is the right to return or to claim compensation, yes. That is true, but let me just be clear that whether you are received or not, I'm sorry, I should have passed the microphone, and I will do that in the future, even though I don't think it goes much longer than this, the cable. She was saying that the Jews from Arab lands were actually able to relocate and were received either in Israel or in other places where the Palestinians remained as refugees. That is factually true, but I just want to say that from the point of view of international law, whether you relocate or not, you still have the right to return. And now, the Jews, the Mizrahi Jews, Sephardic Jews, we don't want to go back to those countries generally. If some want, they should claim that. But that's not the claim that you hear. Palestinians want to return. I want to say, though, that we also have to be, put all of the cards on the table and say, frankly, the treatment that Palestinian refugees are getting in Lebanon, in Syria, in other countries, it's not good. So it's, like Israelis are at fault in the sense that Palestinians should be able to return, but this is not to excuse the treatment that Palestinian refugees are getting elsewhere. They should be treated in a dignified manner, and that is not happening either. So the Palestinians are losing from both sides. This is just like a small asterisk in the BDS conversation. I opened this chapter of the refugees because really that's the underlying discussion. At least when you're speaking in mainstream Jewish circles, they're not afraid of the Caterpillar discussion. They're not afraid of Veolia or Hewlett-Packard. They're not afraid of the occupation. As a matter of fact, the majority of American Jews do not like settlements in the West Bank. They oppose settlements. But they are afraid of BDS because they believe that BDS is going to lead to the right of return, which is one of the parts of the call, of the BDS call. And so that's why I wanted to expand this part of the conversation. Now, people say that BDS is divisive and BDS is controversial. Well, that's true. I agree. It's divisive and it's controversial. But you show me one issue of social justice that was not divisive in its period, before it settled. And I will tell you that probably the most divisive and controversial issue of justice that we have had in our experience in this country was what? Not even civil rights. Before civil rights, slavery. It was so divisive and so controversial that the country turned against each other. There was a whole freaking civil war that happened, and people killed each other by the thousands over this controversy. But I don't think that there's many people, even in the South, that would support slavery today. At the time, people did support it. And it was controversial and it was divisive. So I am not afraid of controversy. I'm not afraid of division. I'm not suggesting that it's a good thing. I'm saying that there are more important values than getting along all the time. And the issues of human rights, the issues of justice, the issues of dignity are more important. Now, we can agree or disagree on where those lines stand. What do human rights say? What does justice mean? What is really dignity? We can agree or disagree, and that's a fine discussion to have. But the discussion about being divisive or not is not a discussion that I'm interested in or that scares me. Now, what's happening, at least from the organized Jewish community, is that what they do, and they are doing this very cleverly, what they're doing is that they're transferring the discussion of what is happening in Palestine to what is happening in here. So I participated in a good number of divestment hearings, both at the level of churches and also in campuses. One of the first divestment discussions where I was involved was in the UC Berkeley campus in 2010. There were long discussions that lasted from 10 p.m. until 7 in the morning in at least 3 occasions. And it was very interesting because our side was presenting the facts about what was happening on the ground in Palestine, particularly, for example, with Caterpillar. What were the bulldozers doing? How the houses were being demolished? How this was a violent act and there was a non-violent reaction, which was to divest from this company. And the other side had nothing to say about home demolitions, had nothing to say about bulldozers. They were not there to defend the settlements. What they would say is, oh, but this offends us here, this hurts us here meaning in Berkeley, here meaning in this community, this is dividing us, I'm feeling afraid. And so they were transferring what the horror stories that we were talking about over there, they were transferring them to over here. To look at me, I am your neighbor, I am afraid. Now, I understand that some people may feel uncomfortable by BDS. By uncomfortable is not the issue here. Always in cases of social justice, some people will feel uncomfortable. And sometimes feeling uncomfortable is not a bad thing. It's not the end result, it's part of a process. But that shouldn't replace what is happening over there. So we should have love, compassion, care, etc. All of those things are good things for everyone in here. But that is not a replacement. That's not an answer for what is happening over there. We are still looking at a nonviolent solution, and that's what we're doing with BDS. Now, this year in particular, at least 2 churches took great steps forward, and Jewish Voice for Peace was involved with them not only this year, but we have been working with the United Methodist Church and with Presbyterian Church USA for a good number of years on these issues. And we learned a number of things from those experiences. So I'm going to tell you what we learned. I'm going to tell you some ways to move forward, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. But I see that you're too shy because except for one question or two, I haven't been interrupted. So I'm concerned that maybe you're either fully agreeing with me, which would be totally troublesome, or you're not paying attention, which would be also troublesome, but we'll deal. Okay, so out of BDS, we're going to focus now mostly on the B and the D, the boycott and the divestment. Not because sanctions are not important. Sanctions are probably the most important piece, but sanction is something that the government needs to do. Our US government needs to do. And our government, I don't think, is ready at this moment to let go of the military aid that is giving Israel or the vetoes that they're giving at the US Security Council, independent of which administration we will get after the elections. That's not going to happen anytime soon, a change in foreign policy of the United States. And so part of what we're doing with the B and the D, with the boycott and with the divestment, we are building a movement in this country so we are readier to tackle the S later on. But we need to have a larger movement. We need to have what is already starting to happen in this country. There is a cultural revolution happening. The issue of Palestine is becoming, in certain circles, like Central America was in the 1980s, maybe like Vietnam was in the 1960s. This is rising up. This is not to say that there are no other human rights violations or issues happening elsewhere, but there are moments in history, moments in time, where certain issues coalesce. And the issue of Palestine is coalescing, is gelling, and we are making it happen collectively. We still have a lot of work to make it happen, but it's a very important thing that this coalesces, that this gels, because only when it gels, we will be able to have an effect in Congress, we will be able to have an effect in the State Department, and actually, that's where part of the solution is going to be when the US starts being a neutral partner in this situation and not a partner that sides only with one side, which is Israel against the Palestinians. One of the members of Jewish Voice for Peace's advisory board was the late Howard Zinn, the famous historian who actually said repeatedly, you cannot be neutral in a moving train. Now, that is the reason, that is the essence of BDS, of what we are doing. At this moment, we are not being neutral because we are in a moving train. The churches are in a moving train. As Americans, we are in a moving train, but we are not in any kind of moving train because his sentence, Howard Zinn's sentence, you cannot be neutral in a moving train, it almost puts you in the place of being a passenger in the train. And you're just moving with the train is moving and you're moving with history, and you have to either stop the train or do something because you're moving, you're not staying on the same spot. This is a metaphor, but it's only half of the metaphor. The full metaphor is that we are not passengers in the train. We are either driving the train or we are fueling the train. We are giving the fuel to the train. This is our role. This is our role as Americans when our tax dollars are used to support the Israeli occupation. It's our role as members of churches or other institutions that are invested in these human rights violations. So when you're invested, this is something that the churches are going to have to really grapple with, is that at this moment the churches, be it the Presbyterian, the Methodist, most churches, probably excepting the Quakers at this moment, are not neutral on this issue. They have nice words, but they're not neutral. They are complicit in the Israeli occupation. So when they come and they do nice sermons, they are still complicit because the money is still being used for the same purpose. And this is something, this is a process of education that we need to continue engaging people with because we need to get to the point of neutrality. Our opposition actually thinks that BDS, that boycott and divestment, are punitive. They're negative. They sound like bad words. Actually, what churches are doing now is punitive. Investing in these companies is punitive. If you want to be nice, the first thing that you have to do is be neutral. And when you divest, you're not taking sides. When you divest, you're being neutral. You're stepping away from the problem and saying, I'm not participating in this problem, and then you can start being part of the solution. So these are some of the things that we learned this year from these two large divestment efforts. As you know, in both cases, both at the Methodist Church and at the Presbyterian Church USA, divestment did not pass this year at both General Assemblies, but we have some very good lessons and some way forward out of those lessons. The first lesson that we learned is that with neither church, and this is also true, I think, for most churches, not only for these two, we are not starting from scratch. This is important to remember. We are not starting from scratch. The churches already have long-standing policy opposing the Israeli occupation. They have long-standing policy on the issues that we talked about, on the issues of equality between Jews, Muslims, and Christians in the Holy Land. They have long-standing policy on the issue of Palestinian refugees. All of these policies are written on papers or resolutions that have been decided by these churches over decades. So the issue is not what do the churches think, because what they think seems to be fairly clear, with some exceptions. What they think seems to be very, very clear. The issue is what do the churches do? How do they act after they come with those wonderful thoughts, which they have had? Because pieces of paper are important, but paper is not enough. What is important is the action. Now, our opposition, the organized Jewish community as well as the Christian Zionists know that. They know that we are not starting from scratch, and they are behaving accordingly. If you were following the proceedings, both in the Methodist and the Presbyterian case, Our opposition, they were not defending the settlements. They were not saying the occupation is right. They were not saying Israel should be allowed to keep the West Bank, because those were non-starters in these settings. They came up with a bright idea to talk about what they call, quote unquote, positive investment. Positive investment meaning, let's invest in the Palestinian economy. That sounds a positive thing, whereas divestment sounds like a negative thing, sounds like punitive. Let's do something positive. We are a church, we're for positive stuff. Now, if you would have talked to me about positive investment 10 years ago, I would have been super excited, and I would have said, hey, what's wrong with spending money in the Palestinian economy? It sounds like a great idea, and it is a great idea, and I support it. So our opposition actually already conceded from the get-go the discussion about the settlements, the discussion about the occupation, all of those discussions they conceded. They said, no, we agree with you, or we don't want to talk about that. Let's see how we can help the Palestinians. That is amazing. That is a shift that they have to concede so much. And we have to acknowledge that that's part of where we have gotten them to that point, that this is their line of defense. At the same time, we also have to acknowledge what does quote-unquote positive investment means. It's a great idea, and I'm all for it, but the fact of the matter is that it will not work. It will not work for two reasons. First of all, there is no Palestinian economy to speak of to invest in. There is no Palestinian economy to speak of, not because the Palestinians cannot work and create their own economy, but because their economy is totally controlled by Israel. Palestinians don't have borders. Palestinians don't collect their own taxes. They depend on Israel to collect the taxes and to give the taxes whenever they want to. Palestinians cannot have customs. Palestinians cannot control the prices of their products, and they cannot control their resources. Even on the West Bank, the resources are being stolen by Israel. Then you have products like Ahava that sells stolen products, or the land is being stolen. So Palestinians don't have an economy to speak of. So there's nowhere to invest in, really. Now, even if there was, or even if there are some few places to invest, those investment opportunities are very flimsy. One of the things that we were highlighting is that when we were talking about Caterpillar, for example, is that the German government and other European governments have not so much invested, but donated solar panels to Palestinian villages on the West Bank. Now, those solar panels that are in villages south of Hebron are about to be demolished by Israeli bulldozers, by Caterpillar bulldozers. So what is the point of sending solar panels to have? Now, let's start from the beginning. Why are solar panels important? Is it because global warming? Yes, global warming. Solar panels is better than fossil fuels. But they're important for another reason. They're important because Israel does not hook up these villages to the electrical grid. So there is no way for them to have electricity. Israel does not hook up these villages to the water pipes, so they don't have water. So it's important for like basic needs, right? So I'm very happy that the solar panels are there. But this is not an investment strategy, because Israel at any moment can decide to demolish them, and Israel does demolish them. So the idea of positive investment is a good idea, but it's a myth. And we will find over time that churches will realize how mythical that idea is. We're in that process now, because both churches committed themselves to positive investment, both the Presbyterians and the Methodists, and they will find out 2 years or 4 years from now, when they meet again, the Presbyterians meet in 2 years, the Methodists in 4 years, some people will be asking the question, okay, so we decided to do positive investment. What happened with that investment? Where did it go? What happened? And the answer will be, and I can predict, I'm a prophet, I can predict what will happen in a few years from now. The answer will be that nothing happened, that there was no positive investment. And so then, part of this process is proving how things fail, and when they fail, you need to move to the next step. And the next step inevitably will be divestment. So that's that about positive investment and about the fact that we're not starting from scratch. We learned something else from these assemblies. And it's very important. And we learned that words matter, and they matter terribly, and that churches are really willing to listen. Words matter. First of all, if you take the example of the Methodist versus the Presbyterian case, the churches are different, the cultures of decision-making and of handling this issue are different over time, so this is not a perfect comparison. But in the Methodist system, there is no way for outsiders to speak to present witness. In the Presbyterian system, you can present your witness in committee, but not at the General Assembly. So you will notice that in the Methodist system, divestment lost by a larger margin. In the Presbyterian General Assembly, where people could actually speak up, which was in Committee 15. I was there. There were many other people. Some people actually are here at the Sabeel conference that were also there. When we could speak up in Committee 15, we actually won divestment by a 3-1 margin, because we could actually explain our case. And you had Jews, you had Muslims, you had Christians speaking and explaining their story. And actually you had also, of course, Jews and Christians speaking from the other side, speaking against divestment. But when we could explain our case, words mattered, and people listened. And I will say this is an extremely generous proposition. I know of no Jewish organization or no Jewish organized religion group, being Orthodox, Reformist, Conservative, Reconstructionist, or any other movement, that will actually invite people from outside that are part of the faith or not part of the faith to speak to them on important issues. The Presbyterians were extremely welcoming. We're now in a Presbyterian church, I believe. They were extremely welcoming. You did not have to be Presbyterian. You had your 1 minute to present your case. And they listened. This is an amazing opportunity, and this is something that, you know, when they are being lambasted by the resolutions that they passed, etc., you have to understand how welcoming that process was and is. As a matter of fact, in the Jewish community, in the organized Jewish community, as Jews, we do not know how to speak on this issue. I come from San Francisco, and the Jewish Federation actually forbids conversation about BDS. Even among Jews, if you speak about this issue, you are not allowed funding inside of the organized Jewish community. So here you have a community that not only censors these conversations among their own members, among their own people of their own faith, and here you have another community that actually welcomes this discussion and invites people to come from the street and say, speak to us because we want to make a wise decision. So if anything, I have to say, even though we did not get the vote at the end, that process was a very welcoming process, and it's something to be emulated and something to learn from. Words do matter, and every time where we managed to speak collectively, we made a difference. The importance of speaking is not only of the telling of the story, but the ability to tell the story where you have standing shoulder to shoulder Christians, Jews, and Muslims telling the same story and speaking about the same solution. And this is very important because actually the other side, our opposition, tries to change the conversation and say that this is not about Palestinian rights, but this is about Christian-Jewish relations. This is not about Christian-Jewish relations. As a matter of fact, Jews in this country are bitterly divided on this issue. There is not a monolithic Jewish point of view on BDS, or on Israel, or on Zionism. But when you have Christian, Jews, and Muslims standing together, you actually show what true interfaith cooperation looks like. It looks like we can work together. Whereas the mainstream Jewish community, their point of view was, you agree with us, or if not, you are not interfaith. We are taking our toys and are going to play elsewhere. That's not interfaith, that's blackmail. That's not the same thing. That's not what friends do. Friends don't come to you and say, if you have a principled position, I will not respect it unless it's the same as mine. If I am your friend, I say, well, you have a principled position. I disagree with it, but I respect the fact that you follow your principles. That's friendship. And that's what we were demonstrating. Now, when we got to the final vote in the Presbyterian General Assembly, as you probably know, we lost only by 2 votes. The vote was 333 to 331. 2 votes different. What this showed is 2 things. First of all, the church was bitterly divided on this issue, and it still is. So it's a controversial issue. It's not a minority issue, and it's not going to go away. The fact that the margin was so small points to the fact that the number of people that are no longer following the blackmailing story, the people that are afraid of the Jewish, so-called Jewish backlash, are diminishing in numbers. And it means that we are going to win next time in 2014. That's my reading. There's another reading for that, which is that at least in the Presbyterian system, you get to see a number of votes. Some of them are advisory, and then there's a final vote. The advisory votes that happen before happen sometimes from some part of the clergy. You also have the vote from what they call the yads, which is the young part of the church. Now the youth, the Presbyterian youth, overwhelmingly voted for divestment. We see the same in the American Jewish community. There is a generational shift taking place. The young American Jews, by and large, are changing their position. They are changing their view of Israel. They are changing their position about what is happening in Israel-Palestine. You saw it with the Presbyterian youth as well. There is a generational shift, and it's important for us to understand that and to capitalize on that. Now, not only do words matter, but as I said, it's important what words are being said. When I was mentioning about standing shoulder to shoulder, Jewish, Christians, and Muslims, it's not just because it's nice, it's not just because diversity is cute, which it is, it's kind of cute, but it's because it's important to understand that we need to refocus not only what real true interfaith partnership looks like, but we need to refocus the conversation to the moral center of the conversation. The moral center of this conversation is not what Jews think about it. The moral center of the conversation is not Jewish-Christian relations. The moral center of the conversation are the Palestinians, which live under occupation. That's the moral center of the conversation. It's not even us here in the United States. So it's very important that in your nice diversity basket, as you have it, etc., that you do not fall into the trap, which I have seen many times, people falling into this trap, of making this a Jewish-Christian situation, which is really, really what our opposition wants to do, but actually to open it up, not only to have Muslims, as we saw here, but to actually have Palestinians speak with their own voice, not having Palestinians speak about, which I can do. I can speak about Palestinian rights, but having Palestinians speak for themselves, yes.
Can you be more specific about what are the most important companies to divest from? And that's one question. And the other question is, you've been talking about churches. Do you think individual divestment makes any difference, or do you think there are other organizations that we should target?
Yes, so I'm talking about churches because we're at Sabeel, but clearly, so I'm going to address the issue of the companies a little bit later. So, and if I don't, please remind me again. The important thing with divestment, and the same goes with boycott, we haven't addressed the issue of boycotts just yet. The important thing is that these are not individual acts. If you do them as an individual, that's cute and that's nice, but that will not have an effect. But when you look at networks, this is where the effect multiplies. So churches are not just institutions that have moral and ethical standing, but they are a network of people. It's an institution. There are other institutions as well. So we have campuses, and we have here Students for Justice in Palestine, represented in one of the tables outside. And Jewish Voice for Peace works with a good number of campuses. The AFSC works with a good number of campuses on divestment campaigns. And then we also have other institutions. So for example, at Jewish Voice for Peace, we have a campaign targeting TIAA-CREF, which is the largest retirement fund in the United States, and we're asking them to divest from companies that profit from the Israeli occupation. So TIAA-CREF. And I have literature which I'm going to distribute in a second about these campaigns. But again, obviously, divestment happens or boycott happens one person at a time, but one person at a time is not enough. What we want to do is to move institutions from column A to column B. The same is true with boycotts. I want to just wrap up the conversation about the churches for a second, which is that, as you know, yes? Sorry? Okay. That the end of the story at the churches is that divestment did not happen in this place, but both churches did vote for a boycott of settlement goods. Now, boycott of settlement goods is a nice idea, but it's not very practical. It's not very practical because there are not very many settlement goods that are being sold in this country. So going into companies specifically for boycotts, which are different from divestment, I'm going to address divestment in a second, we have, yes? Settlement goods. Goods produced in Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Thank you. That's a good example. Please model it. If you see me speaking fast or if you don't understand, please follow this example. Thank you. I'm sorry? I cannot, the mic doesn't go further than this. Oh, the question is she didn't understand what I meant, and I had to speak more slowly. It's boycott of settlement goods in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. That's the answer to her question. She just wanted me to slow down and explain what kind of boycott I was talking about. Yes. Did the Democratic platform have anything to say on this issue? Both, to my understanding, no. To my understanding, neither the Obama administration nor a future Romney administration would support boycott or divestments at this moment. This is not a movement, and we talked about it when we were giving the example between the story of the Nazi boycott of Jewish goods versus this. This is not a movement that is happening from governments at this moment. This is a grassroots movement that is happening from all of us. We will change governments, but in order to change governments, we need to have a stronger movement first. So we're going in order. If we go out of order, it's just like, shouting and screaming and saying nice things, but it will not have an effect. We have to first build our muscles, our non-violent muscles, and this is what we are doing. So going for a second on boycott of settlement goods, and then I'm going to go into divestment and close it up for questions. Am I out of town? That's bad. Okay, so look, I'm not gonna do the, I prefer giving you time for questions, so I'm not gonna give you the exact companies unless you want to ask me in another question. I have here materials that I want you to take, and I'm gonna shut up, let you ask questions, and if it comes in one of the questions, we'll deal with that. Yes. Yes. Okay, so the question is, to generalize the question is whether there is an investment company at this moment that is, let's say, occupation-free, where you could invest your money. The answer is no. At this moment, there is none. The closest that we have at this moment, first of all, if you want to find out companies, not all of them, but some of the companies are in this flyer that you can come here and get at this table. And there's other materials in here. But the closest that we have come have been with the Quakers, with Friends Fiduciary. They have at this moment divested from all of the companies that profit from the Israeli occupation. We are still looking inside because they may have still investment in some settlement goods. So they may not be 100% clean, but they are the closest that there is. There is no single investment firm in this country that has a screen on the Israeli occupation just yet. And the battle at this moment is not necessary to create that screen because it's very difficult, but we're fighting company by company. There are campaigns against Caterpillar, against Veolia, against Hewlett-Packard, and we can talk more about how to join those campaigns, but we're fighting company by company, putting the facts on the table. Another question? Yes.
You mentioned the Methodists and the Presbyterians. I haven't heard much about in the Roman Catholic Church. What's the status of BDS in the Catholic Church?
Yes. So we actually have worked for many, many years on, I'm sorry, what is the status with the Catholics on this issue? That's the question. So So we could mention many other churches, by the way, and not only churches, but there's also the Muslim community in this country that has engaged on a boycott of settlement dates for Ramadan. I don't know if you know about that. That was started by American Muslims for Palestine. Regarding the Catholic Church, we have worked for many years with the Sisters of Loreto and the Sisters of Mercy and other orders on Caterpillar shareholder resolutions. Now, we have worked at that level, at the level of some of the sisters and some of those organizations. The Catholic Church is much more hierarchical, so we haven't worked at the level of bishops and certainly at the level of the Vatican. The positions are the same. They oppose the occupation, so there's no question about that. The question is, what do they do about that? One last question. Okay, so let me repeat, and this is probably going to be the last question, and I will be here for the whole weekend, so you can ask me more questions later and certainly take materials from the table. The first question is about whether to separate the refugee. I mentioned three sectors of the Palestinian population: occupation, those living under Israel, and the refugees. Whether the refugees should be divided into two categories: those that live in refugee camps versus those that do not. We certainly can divide them in many different ways. The important thing is that both, whether they live in refugee camps or not, are entitled to the right of return. So that's the bottom line of that story. About the second part is, we talk about Caterpillar bulldozing homes. There are other companies, Volvo, Mitsubishi, etc., that also have bulldozers that are also demolishing Palestinian homes. So Caterpillar is not the only one. What do we do with that? There are two quick answers there. First of all, we never said that by targeting one company, you were going to solve the issue. What you're doing is you're building a movement. Even if you get rid of Hewlett-Packard or Veolia, another company will come in its place, but we're building a movement. That's number one. And number two, as important is that, yes, you could start a campaign against Volvo in this country or against Mitsubishi or something else, but the important thing about BDS campaigns is that there's like hundreds of companies that you can get involved. My recommendation is that you get involved in some of the campaigns that already exist, because starting campaigns against many, many, many companies and having small campaigns, hundreds of them, is not going to be as effective as having 4 or 5 campaigns that, once you finish with Caterpillar, then you move to the next target, and to the next target, having stronger campaigns. So that's my recommendation. Thank you.
Let's thank Sydney with a round of applause. Thank you, Sydney. So next is lunch at 12 noon downstairs in the Fellowship.